welcome to today's program about judicial clerkships, and why they're great and why you should do them. I guess that's the subtitle. Let me get a sense, just a show of hands, how many of you are second-year students? Are there any 3Ls? Anyone else? Okay. All right, our 1Ls, this is great, planning ahead. And Emily, you are, who is a, I won't count how many else. So great, so for most of you, the second year of law school is the time to really start thinking about the application process for judicial clerkships. And so those of you who are 1Ls, this is great because you'll be well prepared next year to really jump on this process and understand it. Most people are caught off guard as to how early the process starts and sort of how long the application window can be. And so we want to make sure you have all the information that you need. So we will talk today, well, you'll meet a bunch of folks who are either currently working for the courts, have worked for the courts, will be working for the courts, and get a sense of what their experiences have been both in terms of the work itself and the application process. I'll give you some general information about the application process, but we'll probably save all the nitty-gritty application logistics for a little bit later in the semester. But the idea now is for you to think about, is this even something you'd like to pursue? And if the answer is yes, then we can work together on all the mechanics as we move forward. So let me tell you who's sitting here next to me, and then I'm going to ask each of them to speak a little bit about their experience working for various courts where they've worked. So all the way at the end down there, as someone who may be familiar to some of you, is Jessica Brown. She's a current 3L here at Golden Gate. She has been selected to serve as a judicial law clerk next year for Alaska Supreme Court Justice Craig Stowers. She's also had a few externships in law school, and we'll talk about that too, the relationship between working for courts during school and after school. Jessica has worked for Justice Ming Chin of the California Supreme Court, and she also did an externship at The Hague for the UN Criminal Tribunal, International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia. Next to Jessica is Franz Javi, and she is currently a law clerk to U.S. Magistrate Judge Nandor Vadas at the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California. She earned her law degree from the University of Chicago Law School in 2001. After law school, she worked as an attorney at Howard Rice and another firm, and then from there went to work for Magistrate Judge LaPorte. After working for Judge LaPorte, she worked back in private practice at Deckert, and then came back to the court. And so you see it's a lot of movement and a lot of attorneys now coming to these court opportunities. Next to Franz is Teresa Walston. Teresa graduated from GGU in 2005. When she was in law school, she worked as a judicial extern for two magistrate judges at the federal court, Bernard Zimmerman and James Larson. After she graduated, she worked as an attorney advisor, which is another name for a law clerk, at the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Administrative Law Judges. From there, she got a position as a legal research attorney, another name that essentially means law clerk, for San Francisco Superior Court. After that, she moved into private practice and worked for a private law firm. Today, Teresa is a freelance contributor to The Recorder. Her main responsibility there is interviewing and profiling judges. And so she has done this for over 50 judges now, where she's gone and interviewed them, and you can read her profiles of them in The Recorder. And then finally, we have next to me Jessica Barber-Gonzalez, also a GGU class of 2005 alumna. When she was in law school, she worked at the California State Bar's Court. So they're an internal administrative court. And then after law school, she worked for San Francisco Superior Court for almost 3 years, and then got a position as an annual criminal central judicial staff attorney, yet another name for essentially working for the court. And she did that at the California Supreme Court, and that was initially an annual position or term position, and then that's been converted to a full-time permanent position. So you'll see there are lots of different places in the court, lots of different titles, lots of different paths in the court, and so you'll hear about some of those today. Just a word about the handout. For now, I'd say if you want to keep the side that says court overview in front of you, that may help sort of trace the different courts where our panelists have spoken. You'll see there's a column for the federal judicial court, for the state judicial court, and that's what we tend to think of when we think of court positions. But there's also a whole administrative scheme of courts, both on the federal and state sides. And so as our panelists talk, you might be able to follow along on here and kind of map out some of those positions. And then on the back is a timeline, and we'll talk about that later. So let's see, why don't we, well, what I'd like to do is ask the panelists, I guess I'll start with Jessica, to talk just for maybe 5 or so minutes about the work that they actually do at the court. What does your job consist of? Your tasks, responsibilities, how much interaction, if any, do you have with the justices at your court? And maybe contrast that a little bit with the work you did at the Superior Court.
Yeah, so my job now is essentially writing memos that go to the judges and the judges' staff attorneys. So what I'm doing at the California Supreme Court is petitions for review. So our court is a court of discretionary review, so we don't have to take everything. So people file petitions with us, and then we look them over and decide whether we're going to take them or not. And that's my role. I help the judges make a decision by writing a memo. When I was at the Superior Court, that's when you're at the ground level, like you're getting litigants who are filing cases, and certain legal issues come up in trial or before trial, sometimes after trial, and the judges need assistance with figuring out what the right result is, or if the cases that the attorneys have cited are still good law, or if they're persuasive. And so what we do is we take all of the briefs and the record and everything that the parties have filed, look it over, and also write a memo for that particular judge on what your recommendation is on the issue. So sometimes it can be something enormous, like a insurance, asbestos, third-party litigation on summary judgment, where you have like all these records, and sometimes it's easy, like this woman was walking across the street and she got hit by a car, so she got Medi-Cal as to pay for part of it. So does the insurance company have to pay for the part that Medi-Cal paid? Something that's like very discreet, just like a simple issue. Let's see.
So would you compare maybe your interaction with the judges themselves, maybe the pace in both of those situations?
So at the trial court, it was much more fast-paced. And when you completed your memo, a lot of times you talk to the judges directly about what you wrote, or if they have any questions, and sometimes they would have you come into the actual courtroom and sit in and listen. Where I am now, there's so many levels of attorneys that my interaction with the judges is really minimal. Because if you, and this is what we said at the Superior Court too, if you do a really good job in your memo, you don't need to talk to the judge, usually, because they have everything that they need in front of them. So the same is true with our court. So, and if they do have a question or like want follow-up or more information on the case, it's usually the attorneys that I talk to. We have, at our court, weekly conferences, and then after the conferences, one judge will come talk to our staff about the cases that have been granted or not granted, or if we depublish something, why. So we do have weekly contact with the judges, kind of in a staff meeting setting.
And maybe if you can describe too, especially at your court, the difference between being an attorney who works in chambers and then this idea of a central staff and those controls.
Okay, so someone files a petition for review at the Supreme Court, and there's two central staffs. There's a civil that gets all the civil cases, and a criminal that gets all the criminal cases. I'm on the criminal central staff. So then we sift through them and decide whether we think the court should grant review or not. Once the cases are granted, and it's a very, very small percentage of cases, they get assigned to certain judges, and those judges have staff attorneys, and they're called chambers attorneys. And they help them with deciding the merits of the case, or which way it should come out. Versus what I'm doing is helping them decide whether we should grant review. Is it an important issue of law? Is it a statewide issue? Is there a conflict at the Court of Appeal? Is it something that is going to cause confusion among the lower courts, or did the legislature write something really poorly and we should clarify what they meant when they said something? So that's the main difference. And I would say that most of the justices, there are 7 justices on the California Supreme Court, and most of them have career chambers attorneys. with the exception of Justice Liu, who is the newest member of our court. And he, right now, I think, has 2 annual staff attorneys. So he is bringing in people who just graduated from law school. And they each have like between 5, maybe up to 7 attorneys. So
that's great. Thank you. So Teresa, tell us a little bit. You worked at San Francisco Superior Court. You also worked for the DOL's Office of Administrative Law Judges. So share a little bit about each of those places.
Sure. So I worked at San Francisco Superior at the same time Jessica did. So we were in the same civil department and ended up doing really the same things. The only thing that I would add is that there is an appellate arm to a superior court in some case in San Francisco County, and they hear misdemeanor criminal appeals. So there were many opportunities where we were able to work on appeals, and if the judge liked your memo, you would be able to go in with the panel of appellate judges and be able to present to them as well as hear their argument. They argue back and forth, which I found really electrifying, really, because you get to see these advocates who are at the top of their game being judges actually going back and forth with their points of view on a case, and you would get to weigh in as well. And if they liked what you wrote in your memo, you could then be the draft opinion or order. So that was, I loved that part of working with San Francisco Superior. Compared to the DOL, very, very different experience. So San Francisco Superior was very, very fast-paced. The DOL, by the time I got there, let's see, there were 7 judges, 4 research attorneys or law clerks. I was assigned to 2 judges, so there was not enough funding for every judge to have an attorney. And then under that, we had externs. So we frequently used externs to do a lot of the research and writing with us. But when I got there, there was such a lag in the work coming out that if you had a hearing in 2013, let's say, it could be 2 years before you got your opinion back. This had to do, of course, with the volume of cases as well as the product itself. Instead of a 2 to maybe 20-page memo at the Superior Court, we would be writing 20 to 60-page draft opinions at the DOL. So extraordinarily different experience where really I could be holed up in my office for 2 weeks and not see anyone, and I would have boxes and boxes everywhere and just be reviewing medical records and witness testimony and depositions, and then putting a fact statement together that could be as long as 20 pages for the judge. So very, very different experience, very rewarding though in both cases where I stepped into the DOL. It's an administrative agency, and I had never taken a class at GGU on administrative law. I had no experience in administrative law. I'd never taken a class in employment or labor law. And it really, I could learn everything on the job. And there was the support from the judges. So even though I could be in my office for 2 weeks and not see anything, the judges were on the same timeline that we were unless they were traveling, where I really could be in my judge's office every single day and say, I found this, have you considered that? Of course he always did, and said, we'll go this way or that way. So they were very, very accessible. So that was another difference from San Francisco Superior. I had a lot of face time with the judges.
And then my impression is you didn't necessarily have a lot of interaction with parties at Department of Labor, so maybe talk about that.
Right. Well, actually, no, not face-to-face, but we did, we were the first line for the calls coming in for the judges. So they had, again, with the administrative staff, with the budgeting as it was, there were floaters. So not every judge had a secretary or someone to answer the phone. So we frequently fielded phone calls, and there were many times where the attorneys would sit in on the administrative desk and I would answer every phone call that came in, and I was the receptionist at times. So yes, we got a lot of experience with parties that way on the phone, but you can't be having ex parte communications, you can't give them advice as an attorney. So although I was able to communicate scheduling things or give them resources to be able to help with their case, I certainly couldn't. No, you can't give them sort of legal advice.
My impression is there weren't that many hearings in person, and that's quite a different experience than being at Superior Court when there's a lot happening.
That's right. Yeah. So there are court rooms in these administrative agencies where there's a bench and counsel tables, and witnesses are called in. However, it tends to be mostly attorneys arguing motions. occasionally witnesses will come in, occasionally depositions, but, or I'm sorry, just testimony. But yeah, a lot of these hearings were in Idaho or in Hawaii. Our federal judges had a circuit, so they, obviously I wouldn't be going to Hawaii, although I did try. But Judge Pulver, for example, said, well, I might be in Honolulu, but I'm certainly not on the beach. I'm working the whole time, so it didn't make it sound too big after all.
Thank you. So, Franz, why don't you tell us a little bit about your current experience as well as your prior experience with judicial court?
Okay, well, both clerkships were with magistrate judges, and the biggest difference is that they cannot hear cases from start to finish without consent of the parties. So some parties do consent, and we have cases through trial. But we also do, my judge also does things like settlement conferences, which district court judges do not do. And those are really interesting. That's one of my favorite parts of this job, because that is ex parte communication. You get each side's briefs that explain their view of the case, and it's just different than a formal filing, which will be seen by the other side. So you get a lot of different information through that. And then I get to sit in on the conferences, which is also an amazing experience, just to see how it really works and the pressures that exist in the case that have nothing to do with the law, the personalities, and the principle of things. So that's a difference. And then also magistrate judges receive referrals from district court judges, which can be discovery, which can be default judgments, which can be a whole bunch of different things. So we see a wide variety of cases, which I need variety to keep interested in, and I'm very interested in this job. And it was the same thing with judge report. The big difference for me this time around is that my judge actually sits in Eureka, which is 5 hours away for those of you who have not gone there. And so he's only in town once a month. So I don't have day-to-day physical contact with him, but we do speak on the phone, and we have a video conference system. We hold hearings in San Francisco with him in Eureka, or with him in San Francisco and people in Eureka. So that feels pretty smooth, actually, and I do feel I have a relationship with him, even though we're not in the same location. When I was clerk of judicial court, I was about as far from her as you are, and I saw her every single day. So it is a very close interaction with the judge. I also organize brown bag lunches for the clerks and the externs, which if you're externing, you may have gone to. But that gives me the opportunity to interact with other judges. So I think I have probably more contact than most with judges just because of that. And my principal responsibilities involve just reading all the briefs, researching the law, writing memos or draft orders, attending the hearings if I'm interested, and attending the settlement conferences. So it's as much involvement as I would like to have in the process. But also some days you're just too busy and you have to sit at your desk and keep writing, so.
Thank you. So Jessica, you haven't yet started your new job, but maybe you have a sense of what that might be like, because you'll be a chambers attorney, I guess is what, to contrast with what Jessica's doing. Maybe you can also talk about what it's been like already working for Justice Chin.
Yeah, so I was an extern for Justice Chin, who's one of the 7 judges in the Supreme Court, and I was also an extern for a judge at an international criminal tribunal. And so what I did at both those places was, as Jessica mentioned, her staff writes up these pretty banging, kick-ass memos that come to us. They sort of like outline the whole case. When a case is assigned to a judge, we get them as the externs, at least in my chambers. And the staff attorney is typically assigned to work on the case. In our chambers, the externs work very closely with the staff attorneys, and in many cases, the staff attorneys will actually just hand over all the files to the extern to begin with, because they want us to write up the case, look at the conference memo that's been done, and try to figure out basically which way we think the judge should go, which is kind of rad. It's such a fun experience, being able to take, criminal law, and then the next semester you're being asked, like, is this specific intent murder? Whoa, like, I know what that is. So it's super fun. I started working for my judge, working on primarily criminal appeals, and we started getting civil appeals, so I've worked on both. And then when I went to The Hague, I was working on criminal appeals because it's a criminal tribunal. The difference there, though, is that the crimes happened in 1994, and we're now in 2000, at that point 12. So these people have been in jail for a very long time, which is very different and very strange to me, and very strange to us, I think. In The Hague, my judge was a French-speaking judge, and the record from Rwanda is primarily French. So if anybody has experience speaking other languages, I think that's really, really valuable for any type of clerkship. I mean, depending on what type of law you're interested in. If I didn't speak French, I couldn't have got this particular externship. It was also very different because with Justice Chin, we have 7 staff attorneys and about 3 externs, 2 to 3 externs. With Judge Guinée in The Hague, we had 1 staff attorney and 1 extern, like, period. And it was the most intense experience of my life. We were working on, we were the primary authors of 2 appellate judgments that came out while I was there, and we also had comments on circulating issues and other appeal judgments we had to get every single day. So I wrote the comments for the judge, and I would have to explain them to him in French, sometimes 6 or 7 times a day, and he would just like sit there and be like, okay, sign, you know. So it was, so yeah, so it's different, and it just depends on like your personality. I think if you're really like a fast-paced person, I think trial is probably great, although I haven't worked for a trial court, I've only worked on appeal. But there are certainly appellate courts where it's like full-on also, so.
And we'll talk in a few minutes about the application process, but suffice it to say, for most of these positions, the process tends to be pretty formal, pretty elaborate. But I know when you and I spoke, you talked about the power of networking, the importance of that, and so I'm curious to hear what you meant by that and how that affected your ability to get your positions, especially your current one.
Sure. I was not looking for clerkships either time that I got them. Each time I got a call from a friend who let me know that the position was open. They knew I wasn't particularly happy where I was at the time, and called me and said, there's a clerkship position open, would you like to apply? And none of the judges I've worked for hire people straight out of school, so they don't follow the Oscar process. And I applied, and they were able to check my references were people they knew and respected, which I think is probably the most helpful thing about networking, is that these are people you've worked with, so they can, it's not, oh, well, she's a nice person, or something like that. It's like, well, I actually know what her writing skills are. I know how hard she works. And that's a very different recommendation. So I think that, to me, was the most useful aspect of the whole networking relationship. And same thing with externships. My school didn't have them. And when I came out here and I saw that they existed, I just thought, oh my God, why didn't we have that? Because you get to meet judges, you get to meet law clerks, and it's the same thing. If you end up applying for a clerkship later, your work record will still be there, and they can actually speak intelligently about their experience with you. So,
yeah, Teresa, I know, the relationships you had in Judge Larson's chambers have continued on, right?
Yes.
Can you speak to that?
Sure. So I externed for one federal district court judge as a 2L in the fall. And the judge right next to him, I got along very well with his law clerk, and frankly, she took me under her wing, was what it was. And I really enjoyed working with her and wanted to keep working with her, and so she took me on for the following semester. So that's how I got that second externship. And she has been a contact of mine. It's been nearly 10 years now, and we're still in touch. I went to Judge Larson's retirement party. She's been helpful to me as I've segued out of really lawyering legal work into writing legal work, and she's been an advocate for me. So it's been terrific. And in addition to that, it was my externship at the DOL led to my full-time position there right after law school. So I mean, that externship just gave me the tools and the face time with all of the judges there to be able to get that job.
So actually, we'll hold off on the application process and your experience. I know you worked at the state bar court, and I think most of us don't even know there is such a thing. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and both as an externship, and do they have staff attorneys, and is that something students should consider?
So I never thought I would be an extern or a career court attorney. I thought I was going to do civil work, maybe employment or some kind of plaintiff's rights. And I was looking for, I was in HLP, this will have that, yeah. I was in HLP and I was looking for like a 3-hour fall, something to do. And one of the reasons I never thought I would do the judge thing was because they don't pay. And I just didn't, I was kind of intimidated by the whole thing. I thought it was going to be boring. And then I saw that Career Services had like a listing for the state bar court, and I was like, oh, what is that? So I started looking into it, and essentially it's when attorneys are disciplined, they go to they have a hearing, and then they're put on probation or their bar license is suspended or revoked. And then if they appeal it, they go to the highest level in that infrastructure, and it's the state bar review court, and there's 3 judges there. So there's a bunch of hearing judges, and then there's 3 judges there. And then they do have staff attorneys. Back in those days, it was like 5 or 6 staff attorneys, and they had 1 extern. So I didn't have a job yet, so I just applied, or I was kind of like playing everything. And I found out that I could do work study because, well, I don't know if they still do that, but like everything just lined up, and I could do work study. And do that, and it's not a lot of money, but it was enough so that I at least could pay to like transportation and that kind of thing. And then I took classes at night, like in the fall, and it was great because I don't know if any of you are in HLP, but you get to do it for so much longer than people in the summer. Because people in the summer come in I don't know, it's like June, because they're like, oh, I need some time off after finals. And then they leave like in July because they're like, oh, I need some time off before school starts. So they really do it for like a month and a half, 2 months maybe. But I did it for like 3 or 4 months. So I got to write a couple of opinions, and my judge just loved me. And I really, really enjoyed the work. And one of the reasons was because I kind of liked law school. I didn't like the stress or the finals, but I found interesting like the problems and coming to the right answer, or the one that you think is the right answer, versus being like super focused on one side. And it was just like my nature. So I really enjoyed it. And I was like, oh, I know the right answer here. You plug in these cases, you figure out this law, you look at legislative history, you look at all this other stuff. And then he really liked the way that I wrote. He thought I had kind of like a voice for writing objective memos. So he really pushed me to pursue it, to pursue working for the courts. So I got a fantastic letter of recommendation from him, and then I worked, and then I got the job at the Superior Court, which they're really competitive. But if you can work for a court while you're in law school, it's really helpful because that's the time when you're going to get the most contact with the judges, because they're trying to mentor you. Versus what I do now, it's like if I do my job properly, I don't hear from anyone from the other chambers. So I would highly recommend it, even if you think it's not for you. But obviously you guys are here, so maybe you're already considering it.
I would agree, and you certainly heard a trend. You know, the 3 of our 4 panelists did externships, several externships. And you would have if you could have, it sounds like. So certainly it's a great way to get a taste. Do I even like working for a judge? Do I like writing objective memos? Do I like sitting with paper in a room, just me and paper in a room? It's a way to try it on and see if you like it, to get some training, to get that skill set, to get the recommendations and the mentoring relationships. So for some people, the judicial externship is a stepping stone to a judicial clerkship. And for others, that may be it. That may be the entirety of that experience, because maybe they decide, okay, I've got enough, or for whatever reason they're pursuing other goals. But it's a great experience to really see behind the scenes and to understand, if any of you plan to litigate and be advocates, to really understand what the judge sees and what the judge would like to see. and that presumably makes you a better advocate. So I'm happy to talk to folks about judicial externships as well. Leor, who was just here, he and I are both resources for you if you'd like to do a judicial externship or consider that. And we can even talk a little bit about timing and strategy with timing, because I do want to talk a little bit about the application process for applying for these positions. And it, all things being equal, it'd be great to have one, a judicial externship that is, under your belt before you apply for a judicial clerkship for some of the reasons we've talked about. So let's talk a little bit about the application process and what's involved. There, as Jessica said, these are all competitive positions. They're really competitive positions, and they've become even more competitive in the time that I've been doing this work, and that's for a variety of reasons, the economy being what it is. I think judges have had a greater appetite for hiring attorneys into these positions, so there are perhaps fewer positions where they're looking for, entry-level recent law school graduates. There are more recent law school graduates who are looking for these positions because there are other, maybe the big firms don't hire as much. So it's a more crowded pool of people that you're looking at. And the judges are, these are judges, they expect the highest quality of work. And so they can have very high expectations from the applicants. So, so I would say the first thing you want to think about is, do you have, at the very least on paper, the kinds of credentials these judges are seeking? But it has to go beyond that. It has to be about your temperament, your skill set, your interpersonal qualities, some of the things that our panelists spoke to. But you really want to do that reflection and that analysis. And as you'll hear, these are pretty time-consuming processes. So you might want to do that cost-benefit analysis to say, okay, given how much time it will take me to apply, and the resources I have to use to apply, what's my likelihood? And for some of you, you may say, I don't care if my likelihood is this much, I'm going for it, and that's fine. Someone's going to get them, and maybe that will be you. But for some students who maybe don't have that time or the ability to pour themselves in to this process, they might decide to pursue other things, or maybe to not pursue these now and to pursue them later, and I'll talk about that as we move forward. So I just want to give some things to think about. You do want to start thinking about the kind of court environment you want to be in. And you've heard from our panelists that these can be very different positions. Some are very busy, fast-paced. Others, you are working on the same brief for weeks and weeks and weeks. Some you deal with months and months and months. You're dealing with a lot of people, not many people. There are lots of considerations. So you do want to give some thought. Do you want to be at a trial court or an appellate court? Do you want to work in the chamber staff, or would you rather be in a central staff? Do you want to focus on a particular area of law? So if you're trying to build expertise in a particular area, so let's pretend labor, maybe you'd want to focus on an administrative court that handles those issues. Immigration is a perfect example. There's an immigration court here in town. So a lot of our alums who have had a passion for immigration work have started their careers as law clerks at the immigration court. Others who might have an interest in criminal law will try to get a position at Superior Court where they might be able to focus on criminal law matters. Others are more generalists and they'll focus on the federal court. So those are things that you might want to consider. They are certainly things we can talk about one-on-one about what might be the right places for you to consider. If you were looking for geographic mobility, maybe you'd like to move to a different jurisdiction, we might think about either courts in that particular jurisdiction or the federal court system. So you want to think about what's going to serve you well as a building block for your career as you move forward. There are a couple of peculiarities, and I don't mean that quite in the negative way, but just unique features of applying for the federal courts that I'll outline. Just so you have a general view of that, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about state and administrative court opportunities as well. So the federal system is a very organized system, right? I mean, it's the same large scheme of courts all across the country. And years ago, it was this very chaotic thing where every year it seemed like law students kept pushing the envelope for when they would apply, and earlier and earlier. And so several years ago, the judges decided, let's try to create some order here and some predictability to this. And so they did two key things that have really shaped the way the process works right now. The first thing is they created a plan. They call it the plan for hiring law clerks. And they every year will spell out dates. So there's a date by which you can begin applying for clerkships. sort of the beginning of the clerkship hunting season, if you will, and every year they set that date. And so they've set the date, and so for this year, students cannot apply or have any contact with the federal courts until August 19th, 2013, and that would be for 2L, so it's sort of the August 19th leading into your final year of law school. Okay, and it's at noon Eastern time, which is 9 a.m. our time.
Which matters.
It matters, Louise. So, and it's the sort of thing that if your stuff gets to the court ahead of time, it's their prerogative to not consider it because they might think you're gaming the system. If it gets there after that period of time, well, forget it, because every other law student who is applying managed to get it in right at that time. They have plenty of applications to review. They'll never get to yours. So it's this very precise moment in time. Attorneys do not have that same timing consideration, so they can actually apply for positions before that date. And what we are also seeing is they can apply after. So we'll talk about strategies later, but that's something to keep in mind that makes us just that much more competitive for students. We'll see judges will post a position over the summer, and then suddenly it's filled before you've even had an opportunity to submit your application because they've hired an attorney who wasn't bound by the same timing rules. Keep in mind you are only a 3L for a short period of time, so after you graduate, you no longer have to worry about those same rules. They do have dates for when the judges can contact applicants to schedule interviews. There's dates for when the interviews may happen and when the judges may extend offers. So giving you some of those dates on the timeline, those are things that I can communicate with you as we move forward, those of you who choose to pursue this process. But I wanted you to know there is this very strict timeline. The other development that the judges did was that they created a website to manage the application process. And in a lot of ways it has made it a lot easier because with this one system, which is called Oscar, judges can post information. So they can say, yes, I'm hiring a clerk. No, I'm not hiring a clerk, so don't waste your effort applying to me because I'm not hiring. If I am hiring, here are my preferences, here's the time frame, here are the materials I'd like to see, here are the criteria I would like to see in an applicant. So it provides a lot of information. And then the judges can indicate on that system, yes, I am hiring for the next season, here's what I'm looking for, and you can apply through that system. So many of the judges have now migrated onto that system and actually prefer to receive electronic applications. And for all of you who are used to submitting electronic applications, that's a very comfortable process. You're used to doing that. It's certainly easier than having to assemble paper packets and assembling them and mailing them off, and it's certainly cheaper for you because it doesn't cost anything to go onto the website and upload documents and click. Some of the judges prefer to receive paper applications, and so that's something we would work on, and you sort of look on the Oscar system and they'll tell you what their preference is, but you will need to be prepared that you sort of run in these parallel tracks if you're submitting applications to the federal court. Some will be in paper, some will be online. It is all according to the judge's preference, and you need to get the judge's preference right. So again, those are things we would work on together. Having the Oscar system, while it's made it much easier to apply, that also makes it more competitive because what we find is more people are applying to more judges. So back when it was only paper, you can imagine students saying, well, if I'm gonna have to pay for envelopes and postage or FedEx, and I'm going to be smart about my choices because I can't afford to FedEx envelopes to every judge in the federal system. But if I'm applying online, I can apply to a lot. So more judges were getting more applications. So just to give you a sense of what we're talking about, last year during the 2012 hiring season, there were 14 available clerkship positions here in the Northern District of California. For those 14 positions, the court received 2,592 applications just through the online system. So there may have also been some paper applications as well, but Oscar only counts the online ones. So for those 2,600 people, they had a 0.5% chance of getting one of those positions. And it was even more competitive in the Eastern District of California and the Central District of California. There's this cool interactive map on the Oscar website where you can sort of move your cursor over each of the different jurisdictions around the country, the circuits and the districts, and they'll give you stats, how many positions were available and how many applications did they receive. So again, if you have lots of flexibility geographically speaking, you might take a look at that map and say, okay, well, the odds in California are not so great because there aren't that many judges who seek these positions and this is such a desirable location. But maybe in this other jurisdiction where I happen to have some connection, the odds look a little bit better. So that could be part of your calculus when deciding. Also, this year OSCR is starting to put a limit on the number of online applications you can submit. So they're going to limit you to 100 online applications. And so that actually will help, I think, with the craziness of the numbers, because people will have to be more selective with their applications. And you're thinking 100 doesn't sound very selective.
It is.
But yeah, it is. So anyway, so that's just a little word about OSCR. On the state side of things, it's trickier, right? On the federal side, there's this one uniform system. Actually, let me backtrack. There's a uniform system, and while you as applicants and we as law schools are obliged to abide by the system, the judges are not. They're federal judges, and they can do what they want. So while many of the judges do follow the system, some don't. They work on their own time frame, and this year in the OSCR system, they are going to start indicating whether or not those judges want you to follow the OSCR timeline or not. That makes it a little more confusing. On the state side of things, so there isn't one state system. Every state has their own system. Within the state, you'll find each court, each county does it differently. And so as an applicant, that makes it a lot trickier for you. It requires you to do a lot more legwork to figure out, does this court even take law clerks? If so, when and how, and what's their process? So in California, for example, with the exception of Justice Liu, the Supreme Court justices do not take term law clerks. They'll have permanent staff attorneys. And the same is true by and large at our appellate court system in California. So there are not that many opportunities at that level here in California. So if you want that kind of experience at the state court level, you are most likely going to have to look outside of California. We've had alums have great success working at the Nevada Supreme Court, the North Carolina Supreme Court, the Washington Supreme Court, the Alaska Supreme Court. So there are opportunities, but you might need to turn your attention to other jurisdictions if you want to be in a state appellate position. Some counties have positions. So you've heard a few of our folks have worked for San Francisco Superior Court in their legal research attorney program. They typically advertise those positions in the February of your third year of law school, and they typically are due in March. I looked on their website today. I have not seen anything posted yet, so I don't know if it's just they haven't posted anything yet, or if they're not hiring this year. I don't know yet. But keep an eye on that if any of you are 3Ls, and that's also something to keep in mind as you go through this process, that there is sort of that one last opportunity to apply for those positions. One of our grads applied last year. When they interviewed her, they told her they didn't have any funding, but they would put her on a list. And then she finally got a phone call in December or January saying, okay, we've got our funding. We remember meeting you. We really like you. Come work for us. And so she just started a week or two ago. Another one of our grads got a similar phone call, but she'd subsequently taken another job. So you do have to have some patience. This can be an extraordinarily long time frame if you're starting in the spring of your 2L year, and you may not hear back from some of these courts until after you've passed the bar. So be patient and diligent on that. There is one resource I did want to draw to your attention. Vermont Law School publishes a guide to state court clerkships. And so they do research on each of the jurisdictions. They'll provide you with information about Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, and to the extent they are aware of Superior Court opportunities. You can look at it. I think we have a hard copy in LCS, and it's available online, and you can contact us to get the login information to access that. You've heard a little bit about administrative courts, and again, there is not one unified scheme to find these positions. So it really is getting to know which agencies might be interesting to you, which of them offer these administrative court opportunities, and then learning as much as you can about how to get those positions. So the Immigration Court, which I mentioned earlier, they are actually a part of the U.S. Department of Justice, and so they hire their judicial law clerks through the DOJ's honors program. So it might not have occurred to you if you want a clerkship position that you apply through an honors attorney program, but that's how you would do it for the Immigration Court. Department of Labor, I don't remember.
USA Jobs.
Was it? Okay. So usajobs.gov. I know they used to interview at PIPS Day, and we still do that. Sometimes
We did.
Yeah.
That's right.
So each of these agencies will do things a little bit differently, and so it might make sense to start doing informational interviews. You can chat with us. If we've had alums who've worked in those places, we can link you up with them to understand what the path to those positions is. This will require a lot of organization, a lot of calendaring, a lot of prioritizing. Okay, if these positions aren't due until then, I'm going to focus on this piece now. I'll get to that piece later. And those are things we can work on together.
Oh, and for the California Supreme Court, we do hire right out of law school, actually, and we enjoy getting people who are like either fresh graduates or 1 or 2 years out. And we don't usually hire attorneys that have been practicing for a while, because we set up, it's like 2 to 4 positions, and they're annual clerkships. So you come for 1 year, maybe 2 years if we like you, and then we expect you to go and be a lawyer somewhere else. And that's through the calcourt.ca.gov website. And it's usually the same, like San Francisco timeline, like March. I'm not sure if they're hiring this year because of the budget issues, but next year, which is when you guys will be looking, look out for them, I'd say February to March, and then the hiring the actual clerkship would begin in like August, like after they take the bar, so August, September. But sometimes it happened last year or a year and a half ago where one of the attorneys was asked to stay for a second year, and she said yes, but we knew that she was interviewing at the DA's office, and she actually got the job, just delayed by a few months. So just all of a sudden in August we had an opening, and it was I think it was 2010. So yeah, and we interviewed a couple of GGU students, and I think we hired. It doesn't matter. But anyways, so just so you know that you should look out for them, and we put it through the website and then also to the schools. If I hear of anything, I can let you know. But I think you guys get them also, right? I think the court does let us know. Oh, and then just one more note is, so I'm doing appellate work, but because I do petitions for review, we do 2 to 3 memos a week. So the pace isn't harried like it was at the trial court, but it's pretty fast paced versus the chamber's attorneys. They have cases for months and months.
And years.
Yeah, but we don't. Our turnaround is fast because of the nature of the work that we do, and that's why I like it so much.
Yeah, I think Jessica's point is a good one too. If you really want to do these positions, you want to make it known to all the people in your circle, including us, but anyone you've worked with, because I've seen several of our alums over the past few years maybe try for this through the kind of Oscar process or not for whatever reason, but they made it very clear to me this was something they were committed to. Maybe talk to their professors, supervisors. These positions sometimes come up off cycle. Maybe when the funding happened, a current staff member goes out on leave unexpectedly, and the courts are scrambling and they need to find someone, and they're going to tap into their network. And so if you're the one who people know about, they're going to put you forward. The other thing too is these applications are a little bit different in that you typically will need letters of recommendation. And so that's something we'll talk about as well, that you need to plan ahead, right? You can't call your professor or your supervisor or someone you used to work with and say, can you write this letter of recommendation for me? I need it by tomorrow. So if you've gone through this process and you have all those documents ready to go, it makes it easier to apply for subsequent opportunities that come up, often with very short notice. And you can be that person to have your materials in, the recommendations, everything good to go. So you do want to have that longer view for this process. I don't know if you, Jessica, I asked Jessica to calculate how much time she spent applying for her clerkships, just to give you a sense of the process. So I don't know if you have any thoughts you want to share.
Yeah, it was a pathetically long period of time. I mean, I would say I sent out, I think 100 applications, both federal and state. I applied to all the state courts on the West Coast that had term clerks, so Oregon, Nevada, Washington, Alaska, Hawaii. I got the job in Alaska, but it was the summer before your 3L year, you can pretty much kiss it goodbye. All of your nights are going to be spent doing edits on cover letters, making sure there's no typos. But I mean, it's worth it. I'm here today to tell you it's worth it. And I think all 4 of us pretty obviously love our jobs. So how many times do you get to talk to attorneys who actually like what they do? So, yeah.
Maybe we'll hear from the panelists one more time. Given how competitive it is, how hard the process is, how long the process is, why do it? I mean, is it worth it? Who do you think would benefit the most from it, or why you enjoy this so much? Each of you.
I'm kind of the Goldilocks of the law world. I've done really everything, and I'm never happy where I am. Oh, this is too stressful. This is not stressful enough. Or this is this. And clerkships are really a perfect balance. You get to be so intellectually involved in what you're doing, and you learn so much, and you develop these relationships with these judges who are, you know, have such a different experience than partners in law firms, and who mentor you and want to mentor you, whether you're a new attorney or been around forever. There's always so much to learn from them and from seeing the parties get up there and do their thing. And for me, having practiced in a pretty stressful position when I came into my first clerkship, it was so relaxing to see that even on my worst day, I was still better than so many attorneys, which is sad.
Yes.
But also to really see how people performing the top of their game are, and to see this could be me, maybe I tried. And you see different people's styles and different people's approaches, and oh wow, these briefs work so much better because it's 4 pages and it focuses on the actual issue in the case, and they're not coming up with these ancillary, potentially relevant issues, or preserving for appeal or whatnot. So it's just really instructive if you do want to go out and practice later on. To me, it was invaluable because when I came out and practiced again after my first clerkship, I did take a lot of what I learned there and put it into practice. And my writing was better for it, and my approach was more rational and more practical. So I think a clerkship is valuable for anybody who wants to practice, ever, period. I can't speak to whether it's worth going through the summer of applications, but I certainly think a clerkship is a really valuable experience, and fun, and interesting. Yes, I do love my job.
Yeah, I agree. Like, the judges are just operating on like a higher level. So if you have actually an internship, like working a summer at a law firm, and you kind of are guided by the attorneys that you work for. So when you work for judges, you see, oh wow, that's how it's supposed to be done. Like, this is what they're looking for, and it's very. So my job is very academic. It's not. I don't have to get up in front of people and argue. And there are people, I would say, who are very passionate about certain things, like defendants, criminal rights, or the prosecution. And those are the people that need to go out and practice law and do that. But some of us are not that. Like, you're kind of like, oh, I see it both ways. I kind of, And that's the kind of person that would do well in these jobs. But even if you don't want to do it forever, you should at least try it, because it's a great experience. And you kind of see the other side.
Yeah, and I went from meetings with judicial externs to now working in a district attorney's office, and I swear I sit there and I'm like, but the defendant could say this, but the defendant says this, because you're so trained to be like, well, here's both sides. And so my supervising attorney was like, you need to be more of an advocate. We're the people here, They don't care about the defendant, but we want to get the defendant in jail, But it's a really, it's a very different experience. But I think for law school, doing an externship and then being able to write exams is the best skill set I could have gotten. I mean, it was like, here's what the plaintiff's going to argue, here's what the defendant's going to argue, here's what I think is going to happen, conclude, So even doing it now and not doing it after school, I think is still super valuable for the externship process.
Of all the judges I've spoken to, and in my job now I'm able to speak to a lot of them, every single one loves his or her job. So you're working with someone who loves what they do, who has a passion and love for the law. And hopefully you guys still do too. So you need many, many jaded attorneys out there, but if you still have that love and that passion, you're going to be in an environment every day where someone else really loves what they're doing, loves what they're bringing to the community, loves that they're serving justice. And if those are some of the reasons why you went to law school, you're going to love this kind of work. And the beauty of it is, you could take it forward and clerk for the rest of your life. You could take it and become a writer on your own. You could take it and go right into private practice, which I was able to do, and it was terrific because I was hired and the attorney had an appellate case he needed help with, and I knew Carlos over in the appellate department in San Francisco Superior, and I could just call up Carlos and ask him questions. So it's a wonderful way to get to know how the courts work, how to be a better lawyer, but I think it's also a better way to touch that love and that passion that you hopefully still have in you and you can keep with you.
Yeah. Have any of you thought about, as part of your career, being judges yourselves? To me, it sounds like this opportunity and being objective in what you're doing also sets you up with a background to possibly be a justice someday yourself.
Jacqueline Scott Corley at the Northern District of California has done that. She was a career clerk for at least 10 years, and now she's on the bench as a magistrate judge.
Yeah, and it's the same thing with Catherine Vertigar in the California Supreme Court, was California Supreme Court clerk. I say that it's more rare
Right.
these days, especially because you need to have like practice experience to you need to be in California, you need to be a district attorney. There's a reason I'm in the district attorney's office externing now, you know. But I think there's also something really special about being a clerk in that I think in law school, you know, you're taught to kind of be like, ooh, you know. And being a clerk has taught me so much about the humility that the law requires, you know. Like, even if I had worked really diligently with the judge on a case, like, his name is going on it, and I'm proud to sort of like stand behind him and not have to be the one that's like, I did the research, you know. And I think like that does pay off because even when you have a really special relationship with your, you know, clerk or with your judge or whatever, like, they go to bat for you, I think, when the time comes, because they know what you've done, and I think that's really, really special.
Any other questions?
Either what was the best class you took in school that's helped you in your position, or what's a class that you wish you could take?
That's a great question. I would highly recommend taking advanced legal writing in your third year if you can. And I remember kind of my third year, I think it was last or second to last semester, thinking like, I went to the bookstore and saw how many books are required. I was like, oh, do I really want to take this? And then I remember talking to someone who was not a lawyer, just a friend, and on the phone saying, I don't know if I should take this class or something like more, you know, fun. They're like, legal writing and research. Doesn't that seem kind of important for what you want to do? I was like, you're right, okay. So that was a really good class, and I highly recommend that because you will see your writing improve dramatically, especially from your first year, and you'll have good writing samples too. And I will say that like GGU really prepares you to hit the ground running. They tell you that, but when you get out there, you're like, wow, I really know how to do this. Because like my first assignment, I remember at the externing or working at the Superior Court, it was very similar to the first year writing, you know, the writing and research class where you have the objective memo. And it's like, okay, here's the issue, the judge wants to know this, and then you're like, to judge such and such from, like that's what our memos look like. And then you give like your little factual statement, and then your issue presented, and your answer presented, or whatever. And I used one of my writing samples as my writing sample for the Superior Court because they wanted like a 2 to 5 page. Do you remember this? Like a 2 to 5 page writing sample. And I don't know if you have a 2 to 5 page writing sample, but it's not easy to get one. But I used my first, and I just took one of the issues out, and it was great. It was so clear and like just perfect. So they really liked it. Yeah. Classes. Is there any recommendation on that?
I think that
I agree.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I think you could also get that on the job too, I think. Just depends on like your supervisor. Like I had a really good one and she was like, cut. You know? And then I just got better that way. So I just think that you can go about it in much different ways.
Oh, there's one more class is the writing, the one that Michael does.
The research.
The internet.
Research.
Yeah, that class is good. It's what's it called? Research. And then that class is really good. At the end of it, if you do it well, you end up with a little booklet that you wrote for the class, and I still have mine. And I remember like at the Superior Court, I was like, oh my God, it's a booklet. What's that?
Everyone wants your booklet.
I remember my boss was like, wow, that's impressive. So, it's like, this little, I wish I would have brought it. But that's a good class too. And then you can, don't feel shy about like pumping yourself up in the interview or like in your letters of recommendation. Being like, oh, and I took advanced legal writing, and I took, because those are the things that you're going to say about yourself that they'll take note of.
Sorry, didn't mean to catch you up, and that'll be our last.
Yeah, so California Supreme Court, I think we just read something about the strict scrutiny being applied to gay and lesbians now in California, but it's not yet in federal court. So the policy issues and what you guys deal with in terms of novel legal issues, is this something that you want to pursue outside of chambers and outside of clerkship later in life, or is it something that you're, like, policy and legislation, are these things that interest you, and if so, is this a good swim?
Yeah, so after I went to college, I was in policy work for about 4 years, and I came to the law because I found the human rights policy work that I was doing was not very impactful. At the end of the day, I don't think that the law is, in a way the policy is not. But I have some colleagues here who are going into policy because they find that the policy work is much more intellectually creative for them. So I think that the intellectual rigor that everybody talks about, that being both an extern or a clerk teaches you, I think is very, very valuable for policy, because you are asked to analyze both sides of an issue, and that's always a very helpful skill, I think. Yeah.
So I want to point out one or two things before we leave, and that is, if we look at the timeline on here on the flip side, you'll notice the very first thing I put in boldface is that if you have any interest whatsoever in thinking about applying for a clerkship, please fill out this survey that we have here. It's not really a survey. What I want to do with that every year is use that as my group of students who are applying for clerkships. And so rather than bombard every 2L with every deadline of the whole clerkship process, I will create a little listserv of just those students, and then I will communicate regularly. Here's the process, here's the deadline, here's what you need to do, here's the workshop, you know, so it'll become a focused group. So if I don't know you have an interest, then I can't tell you about the deadlines, and if you miss the deadlines, then there's a good chance we won't be able to generate letters of recommendation from the faculty center if you haven't followed deadlines, all of that. So please let us know. You can always let me know after the fact, you know what, I've decided not to pursue it, take me off the list. But it's much harder to sort of jump in when we are mid-cycle and you're, 3 weeks behind on deadlines. So at the very least do that, and then from that group I'll be communicating more regularly. Feel free to make appointments with me and we can talk about this more individually in terms of your own interests. Yes?
As a 1L, should we also fill this out or wait until next year?
I wouldn't bother, because you're going to get a whole bunch of emails that you're going to end up ignoring. Okay, I don't want you to get into the habit of ignoring my emails. Right. So, but if you want to chat about how do you map towards this and what kind of activities, internships should you do this year and in your 2L year to position you well for this, let's have that conversation.
Yeah, basically get the best possible grades you can for 1L year. It should be like the focus, I think.
So I do want to wrap up, because I know some of you have classes now. I want to thank our panelists who go back to work. But thank you so much for sharing your experiences and advice with us. It was really helpful. Thank you for coming. Happy Valentine's Day.